profound truth. There is a life-altering difference between being tolerated and being welcomed. I think we all know what it feels like sometimes to be tolerated. It's that polite nod you receive when you walk into a crowded room, followed immediately by people subtly shifting their bodies to choose the circle back up. It's the unspoken message that whispers, you can be here, but don't take up too much space. Don't disturb our comfort. And for God's sakes, don't make us change. Toleration is passive, it sets boundaries, it guards thresholds, and it keeps people at an arm's length. Holy welcome, or what the Bible might call radical hospitality, is entirely different. It doesn't just open the door an inch, it just throws the thing open. It flings the door wide, it puts out extra chairs, and it says, we've been waiting for you. And this space is not complete without you. And it accepts. To understand that kind of welcome, we have to look past our own defaults sometimes and our own old way of thinking. Consider this classic dilemma. It's an ethical dilemma that was used as a way of corporate interviews. You're driving along in your car, and it's a wild and stormy night. One of those great opening lines to the worst hackneyed novels. It's a wild and stormy night. And you pass by a bus stop, and you see three people waiting in the bus stop. An older woman who looks like she's about to die, an old friend who once saved your life, and that perfect soulmate you have been dreaming about your whole life. Knowing that you have room in your car for only one person, who do you choose? Okay. You could pick up the older woman because her life may be in imminent danger, but you can also take your old friend because it's a perfect chance to pay back his saving your life or her saving your life. But if you leave, you may never find that love of your life again. What do? Well, the job candidate who got the job thought outside the box. He simply said, I would give my car keys to my old friend and let him take the elderly lady to the hospital, and I'd stay behind and wait for the bus with the person of my dreams. Everything's covered. The job candidate ultimately was hired, and that holy welcome helps us break out of that rigid, self-protective boxes, or even the rules we think are hard and fast that are just made to be broken anyway. I break the rules all the time. I think I might have told this to you before, but I tell everybody. I talk in elevators. You know how hard it is for people to have people talk to them in an elevator? You're breaking a social rule. Yep, I am. But I've had great conversations when I break the rules and talk in elevators. Now, I do have to caveat this now in today's world. I do not talk to young women when we were alone in an elevator. That just crosses boundaries I don't want to deal with. But it's tough, you know. But when we step out in faith, we never fully know how life will be touched by those small acts of welcoming and kindness that we can do. John Bowes was the chairman of the company, the Hasbro company that makes Frisbees. And he once sent 1,000 Frisbees, 1,000 of those plastic discs, to an orphanage in Angola, thinking that children would love to play with them. Months later, a representative visited the country and visited the orphanage, and one of the nuns was taking him around and thanked him profusely. He said, "Thank you for those wonderful plates you sent. The children were eating off the Frisbees, and they carry water in them, and they even catch fish with them." And when the representative explained what they were actually used for, that they were flying toys, the nun was delighted. He says, "Oh, they can also use them to play with." Both sides got an education that neither one was done with what a Frisbee can actually be. Now, I'm going to invite you to test that. Go home and take a collection of things you have in your house and create a play, create a little skit, or just engage them as though you've never seen them before and make up whatever you think they might be used for. And see what your imagination comes up with and how you can break through those boxes. God takes our simple offerings and expands them beyond their original limitations and original imagination. So we want this holy welcome, this radical hospitality. So when we look at the ministry of Jesus, we see that this radical hospitality is not a nice social grace. It is deeply theological, it is deeply philosophical, and it's deeply evangelical. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus outlines what scholars call the principle of Shalia, the ancient Jewish legal concept where persons are an agent or messenger is treated exactly as the person themselves. So if I go in Bernie's name to see Brian, all of Bernie's stuff goes with me. And I stand for him and all of that. So we establish a vertical cascading chain of identity when we follow Jesus. Whoever welcomes you welcomes me. Whoever welcomes me welcomes he who sent me. It's that whole idea that when you come out as an ambassador of Christ, it is Christ. I read something the other day on Facebook. Every once in a while you can read something good on Facebook. And it was written by C.S. Lewis. And he said basically this: Christians acting badly is the one thing that makes Christianity hard for those on the outside to accept. Because when they see you and you call yourself Christian, they see Christ. They understand Christ. Whether you want them to or not, what you do shines Christ. When you step out in the world as a believer, you are acting as Christ. So Jesus completely dismantles this human tendency to measure meaning, to philosophically measure meaning by a scale of power or volume. He frames the ultimate reality around the concept of hospitality in the micro moment, even down to giving just a cold cup of water. The world value says you are worth what you can produce, protect, or conquer. You're worth your power and your money and your prestige. The kingdom value says your value is intrinsic, tied directly to your identity as a child of God. Nobody deserves your love because of something they've done. They deserve your love, respect, and your welcome because they merely exist. They are in this world with you. Now, we often link evangelism to a position of strength, bringing answers, resources, or programs to people who lack them. But Matthew 10 says Jesus sends his disciples out in an absolute weakness. He tells them to take no money, take no extra clothing, take no staff. They must depend entirely on the hospitality of strangers. That's what Jesus sends them out as. This creates a brilliant evangelical dynamic. By allowing ourselves to be hosted, we give the world a chance to respond to God. When we allow ourselves to be vulnerable enough to need help, it lowers the defenses of the people we're trying to reach. Vulnerability becomes the fertile soil where the seed of hospitality and gospel takes root. So it's not in your power that you bring Jesus, it's in your humanity. It's in your existence and your it's like Paul says, it's in my weakness that God shows strength. Because when I got to the end of what I know, which isn't a very far road, and I got to what I think I could do in my ministry, and I said, well, okay, I'm beyond what I know to do. God, what am I supposed to do here? And it's amazing because my strength has always been filling a room with words. I could argue, I could talk, I could do all sorts of things like that. But when you're dealing with somebody who is desperately in pain, dying, grieving, suffering, sinning, all your words could just fall on deaf ears. I remember being in a hospital room and a man's wife is dying and he's just asking me why. Now, having a degree in philosophy and 2 degrees in religion, I'm pretty good at coming up with answers. I could even make them up. But I had nothing to tell him. I couldn't answer that question. But what I could do, and what I didn't know I could do, was I could take his hand and both of us could sit there and cry. And by sharing his tears, we shared God's love. That's welcoming. It's going beyond the need to be right. So we want to live into this radical hospitality. Now, this is going to get a little, we're going to do a little Greek and Hebrew and Latin in this, so just bear with me, because that's the names of the stuff. The concept of a holy welcome moves far beyond the modern and secularized idea of hospitality. It's not entertaining, it's not social etiquette, it's not a curated comfort. In our faith tradition, hospitality is a disruptive, counterculture, and spiritually weight-bearing act. It is the practice of creating a safe and sacred space where even the stranger is transformed into a guest, and the guest becomes a revelation of God. It does that by what's called the Imago Dei, which is inclusivity. To extend the holy welcome to another person is to recognize the image of God in them, acknowledging their inherent dignity regardless of their social standing, background, or brokenness. I remember coming into my a church I was serving at one time, and one of the officers of the church, a board member, came up to me and said, "Pastor, what are we going to do? There's this guy out here sleeping on our front porch." Now, it wasn't the door that people came in and out of anymore, but it was still, you walked past it at the window, and he's sleeping there. He goes, "What should we do? How do we, how do we deal with him?" And after my initial quiet, silent reaction of, "Why are you asking me this? It's a no-brainer." But for him, it wasn't. I looked at him and I said, "Open the door. Invite him in. Get him a cup of coffee. If he's hungry, look and see if there's something to eat in the kitchen. Invite him to worship." It's a human being. It's not something to be ashamed of or afraid of. The other is because we have, in the world that we have to deal with, is a xenophobia that we have to turn into xenophilia. Xenophobia is the natural human reflex of encountering the unknown and fearing it. So we fear the stranger. It leads to walls. It leads to a tribalism. It's like back when we celebrate Pride Month, and when the whole conversation around gay marriage was coming around, or civil unions. They said, gays shouldn't be married. I said, if you don't want a gay marriage, don't have one. But why are you stopping somebody else from having it? It's like the fear of that transition. And quite honestly, if you want to look at the results of it so far, gay marriages are lasting longer than heterosexual marriages have been. The heterosexual divorce rate is up to 51%. There are more people getting divorced than staying married. That's the sanctity that people want to protect? No, put more and more people into that thing so we can learn how to do it right. Let's just blow it all out of the water. Turn it into a love of the unknown. And then there's this kenosis. That is the idea of self-emptying. In the incarnation, Christ empties himself to enter our space, to become flesh, to become human. Crossing the ultimate boundary between the divine and the human, radical hospitality requires our similar kenosis of setting aside our own comfort sometimes, our own agendas and security to make room for someone else. Even, and this is the hard one for me, even people who don't think like we do. Even when that radical, crazy left has to deal with that abhorrent MAGA right. It's like neither one of those people should be standing on their ideologies. They should be standing in the love of God. And I have a hard time, I tell you, I don't know who you are in this politically, and I'm not going to worry about it, because if you want to hate me for what I'm about to say, that's fine. But I have a hard time with MAGA people. I do. They stand for pretty much everything I hate, except one thing. They are fellow human beings. And so I've got to sometimes make room for that. Not change who I am and not agree with it, but still be welcoming. Because we have to dismantle our power dynamics. A radical host does not patronize the guest or use their position to control the guest. In other words, if you have somebody over for dinner, it's not because you want to have dinner back. It's not a quid pro quo relationship. The host submits their space to the comfort and safety of the guest, elevating all the vulnerable. It's that dismantling the idea of power. And it's actually a beginning of our kind of practicing the hosting for eschatology, that whole end of the world stuff. Every tribe, every nation, and everyone is pulled into an eternal communion. We're practicing that so that when we get to the afterlife, we won't be so surprised. When we practice this kind of open hospitality, the table becomes an altar. And we establish a culture of belonging before believing. In other words, are you aware that when the first missionaries went out from the church, let's say they went in Hawaii, let's just start with Hawaii. When the missionaries went to Hawaii, they didn't teach the gospel. They didn't teach anything. You know what they did when they first got there? They made all of the Hawaiians they could to change their clothes so they'd wear pants and shirts. They would get them to eat and behave like white people. And when they were ready, when they were worthy, then they began to learn the faith. I think they should have listened to the Hawaiians and learned what they believed and found out how it affects their faith, and then give it back and forth. But that was the way it is. I mean, I'll love you when you're worthy. I'll love you when you earn it. Well, if you're earning my love, then I'm not loving you, am I? It's just not love. Love is freely given. It doesn't have to be earned. So let's kind of wrap this up a little bit with the idea of you all know Henry Nouwen? Anybody read Henry Nouwen? Or am I the only one? Henry Nouwen is a great writer, and he writes some wonderful stuff. He writes books like called The Wounded Healer and those kinds of things. Well, he has this spectrum of hospitality, that it's a spectrum between hostility and welcoming and hospitality. As long as we are lonely, we cannot be hospitable, he says, because as lonely people, we cannot create free space. Our own need to still our inner cravings of loneliness make us cling to others instead of creating space for them. So to keep ourselves anchored on the side of hospitality, Nouwen says there are 3 characteristics. 1, non-coercive. 2, active listening and attention. And 3, a solidarity in weakness. Non-coercive. Hospitality is not to change people. Oh, how many of us, I remember the story from a wedding where the minister was talking about the bride. She was so nervous about doing it right. And she wanted to get, first of all, you walk down the aisle, and then you get up there, you change position, and then you go with him. So she's practicing this in her head. Aisle, change, altar, aisle, altar. Sorry, I did not change, it was altar. That's an important right word, altar. Him, I'll alter him. I'll alter him. I'll alter him. How many people get married thinking that he's mostly what I want, but I'll get him the way he's supposed to be? I looked at my wife one day. I said, Joan, we're almost married 50 years. When are you going to understand that this is who I am and it ain't going to change? We don't go into these relationships to change other people. We go into a relationship to grow with them, to be with them. So it's that non-coercive. Then we have to actively listen. The problem with America, one problem with America, is that people tend to listen to respond, not listen to understand. So if you're listening to somebody and thinking about what you're going to say next, you've missed their point, probably. So let your conversations be a little clunkier, a little harder, a little less polished, and really try to understand, of setting aside our own anxiety, setting aside our own agendas, and fully be present to the person in front of us, and then welcome others when we are honest about our own brokenness. I'm a fellow traveler. When I preach, I'm not setting myself up better than you. I'm just one of you. What I love about preaching is I get to talk to God, and you all just get to listen to it. So this is really more about me and about God than it is about you, and hopefully you take something with it. But we're fellow travelers here. And our hierarchy dissolves and our healing community begins to evolve. So we look at these as like, there's the guest. The hostile approach is someone to be fixed, somebody to be converted, changed. The hospitable approach is somebody to be encountered and honored. The space, cluttered with agenda and opinion. You want to see that true in the church? Bring up money or music, and you'll see how fractured a church can be. Hopefully you're not like that, right? You loved all the music that's played, and you got lots of money, right? Nobody has lots of money today. But when we come into the hospitable world, our space becomes a free space, cleared of all those artificial needs. The goal, in the hostile world, you bring them onto our side. Convert them to our side. The other one is providing freedom to discover their own way. There are as many ways to follow God as there are people sitting in this room right now. And they all have something to teach. And the power in the hostility is to control. It's a hierarchy. In the hospitality, it's vulnerability and shared humanity. Hospitality is not an educated intimidation with good books, good stories, or good works, but the liberation of a fearful heart so that words can take root and bear fruit. That's what Nouwen says, and I believe that. So I'm going to tell you two stories about how this all comes together. It's an old story of a man sitting alone on the steps of a grand church building. An officer of the church walked into him, adjusted his suit, and asked a series of polite but guarded questions, trying to ascertain if the man belonged there, subtly letting him know that he was taking up too much space. He was being tolerated, but he wasn't being welcomed. Somewhat like that man I told you about sleeping on the front porch. How different the world would look if we did a path of holiness. Think of Sarah and the Al-Zubi family. When the Al-Zubi family arrived into their United States, into their new suburban neighborhood as refugees, the culture and linguistic barriers felt like an unclimbable wall. They were safe from the conflict back home, but they were profoundly isolated. Sarah really wanted to welcome them, but she didn't speak Arabic, and they spoke very little English. Instead of letting discomfort dictate her actions, Sarah practiced extravagant welcome. She knocked on the door, holding a beautifully wrapped bundt cake. If you don't bake, nothing but bundt. You can get them right there. And she had a translated note that read, "We are so honored to have you as our neighbors. My kitchen is always open to you." Seeing the ingredients, Mrs. Al-Zubi smiled, and the next weekend, she invited Sarah over. And no words were needed. Standing side by side in a small kitchen, they rolled out dough and made mahamul, a small cookie, an Arabic cookie. And they communicated through gestures, shared laughter over spilled flour, and the universal language of a timer dinging out. Within months, Sarah had organized a neighborhood progressive dinner where everyone tasted dishes from the Al-Zubi's culture, and the strangers became a neighbor, and the neighbors became a family. Now think of Cleo, who was terrified to attend her first LGBTQ meeting, affirming choir practice. She was joining a gay choir. Having grown up in environments where she was forced to hide her true self, walking into a room full of strangers felt like walking into the lion's den. She sat into the very back row, her hands shaking as she gripped her sheet music. And the choir director, Leo, stepped up to the podium, and he didn't just announce the first song. He stopped, looked around the room, and said, "Before we sing, look around you. If you have been told your voice doesn't matter, if you have been told you're too loud, too quiet, or that who you love or how you identify makes you less than, I want you to hear me. You are entirely safe, profoundly loved, and desperately needed in this room." That choir erupted into a spontaneous applause and cheers. Chloe burst into tears. But for the first time in her life, there were tears of overwhelming joy. When they began to sing, the sound was magnificent. It wasn't just technically good, it was an explosion of a collective joy, because everyone in that room was radically welcomed exactly as they were. And they sang with an uninhibited, fierce beauty that captivated everyone who heard them. That's extravagant welcome in two examples. It's not passive politeness. It is an active, intentional, disruptive choice to create a space where people do not have to change who they are just to belong. When we practice holy welcome, we don't just change the lives of our guests, we transform our own. Let's go out into this world, step out of our boxes, empty ourselves of agendas, and fling open our doors and say, come on in, take a risk, and let's see what can happen. I think we need that more today than we ever have, because as a society, we're growing more and more agendaed and fractured and siloed. We're losing our ability to connect. And it's not going to happen by osmosis. It's only going to happen because we decide to do it. And so Christ calls us to welcome. And I've always been welcomed by you, so I know that you can do it. But then I'm an old white guy who doesn't really change the complexion of this room, except I wear very brightly colored shirts. But here we have sitting here, all of you may think you were the same, but all of you are also very different, and yet you've decided to be a family. We got suspender wearers. We got polo shirt wearers. We got pregnant ladies. I always get worried about that one because sometimes you call a lady pregnant and she's just, large. And that would be bad. We got people with gray hair, people with no hair. We got people with hidden pain, people with questions, people with answers. But until you're willing to be open, you're not going to know any of that. And it could change your life.